Before I tell you how I made an entire HOA board apologize and pay me over $25,000 in damages, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you don't want to mess with someone who knows their rights and understands the law. Deborah from the HOA thought she could use her petty power to force me to remove my beloved boat, the last gift from my late father, from my yard. What she didn't expect was that my father left me not just the boat, but a special deed, and a lifelong lesson in how to handle power-hungry bullies. So sit back and watch how I turned this nightmare into the sweetest victory I've ever tasted. The morning sun shimmered across Lake Westwood like scattered diamonds, a view I never grew tired of, seen from my deck. I had been living in this lakefront home for just over a year since my father passed and left it to me, though he'd owned it for nearly 30 years. It was a modest two-story with weathered blue siding that had stood strong through countless summer storms. But what made it truly special wasn't the house. It was the private dock and the 50 feet of pristine shoreline that came with it. And of course, there was the boat. The Serenity was a 28-foot wooden sailboat, a classic Cumberland sloop from the 1960s that my father had lovingly restored over the years. He taught me how to sail on her, and now I was passing that on to my 15-year-old daughter, Emma. We'd spend weekends sanding, polishing, and making small repairs to keep her seaworthy. When we weren't working on her, she sat proudly on her trailer in the side yard, visible from the road, sure, but not obstructing anything. To me, that boat was the last living connection to my father, a Vietnam veteran turned real estate attorney. He taught me that real freedom requires both vigilance and knowledge. "Dad," Emma said one Saturday, as we replaced some worn rope on the jib, "Mrs. Peterson from next door said someone was asking about your boat." Emma was sharp. She had her grandfather's analytical mind and her mother's artistic soul, a combination that made her both observant and empathetic. She said they were taking pictures and writing stuff down. I shrugged, not thinking much of it. "Probably just admiring her," I said, running my hand along the polished teak gunnel, feeling the smooth finish that had taken hours of love and labor. What I didn't know then was that the nearby development, Westlake Shores, had recently formed a homeowners association, one that was quietly expanding its reach and influence over the lake. In the past few years, several wealthy families had built flashy new mansions around the lake, and apparently, they had very different ideas about what lakefront life should look like. The first letter came on a Tuesday, certified mail. The envelope bore the embossed logo of the Westlake Estates Homeowners Association. Strange, considering my house existed decades before that association even formed. I opened it at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, completely unprepared for the wave of anger that hit me as I read, "Dear Mr. Reynolds, it has come to our attention that you are maintaining a boat on blocks in your yard in direct violation of Westlake Estates HOA Covenant, Section 7.3, regarding visible recreational vehicles. All boats must be stored in approved garages or off-site facilities. You have 14 days from receipt of this notice to remove the vessel or face fines of $100 per day. We appreciate your prompt compliance in maintaining our community's aesthetic standards. Sincerely, Victoria Blackwell, HOA President." I read it once, then twice, then a third time. Each time, my blood pressure crept higher. My property wasn't even in their estates. My father had made that clear to me my whole life. We had special rights to this land. No one could tell us what to do with it. Apparently, now I'd have to defend that truth. I crumpled the letter and tossed it toward the trash, missed by a foot. I didn't know it yet, but that letter was only the start of something bigger. Thankfully, my father had left me more than just a boat. He'd left me ammunition. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, hoping this was all just a misunderstanding. The meeting was held in the clubhouse of the new development, a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I parked between a row of luxury SUVs and reminded myself, I belonged here too. More than most, actually. My family had been here longer than all of them combined. The meeting room was set up with folding chairs facing a long table where 5 people sat, name placards in front of them. In the center was Victoria Blackwell, mid-50s, blonde highlights, in a perfect bob. A tailored suit that probably cost more than my mortgage. She looked up when I walked in, already assessing me. To her right sat Gregory Palmer, a retired CEO, checking his Rolex every few minutes. To her left, Maria Sanchez, the secretary, nervous, quiet, and visibly anxious every time Victoria glanced her way. The two other board members, one a retired doctor, the other a real estate developer, looked like they'd rather be on a golf course. I sat through endless discussions about lawn care contracts and pool chemical levels. When they opened the floor to concerns, I raised my hand. Victoria's eyes flicked toward me. Her painted eyebrow arched slightly. "Yes, the gentleman in the blue shirt," she said, pointing at me with a silver Mont Blanc pen. "My name is Alex Reynolds," I began. "I received a letter about my boat, but there's a mistake. My house isn't part of Westlake Estates. It's been in my family since the 1950s, way before this development even existed." Victoria gave a thin smile, one of those smiles that doesn't touch the eyes. "Mr. Reynolds, Westlake Estates HOA coverage was expanded last year to include all lakefront properties for shoreline management consistency. Your property now falls under our jurisdiction as per the county's expansion approval. All homeowners were notified." She shuffled some papers, clearly rehearsed. "We appreciate vintage vessels as much as anyone," she continued, "but rules are rules. The boat must be properly stored out of view." I tried to bring up my property rights, but she cut me off without hesitation. "The bylaws are clear, Mr. Reynolds, and while we understand it may be sentimental, no exceptions can be made. Allowing one opens the door for everyone to claim the same." Gregory leaned forward, speaking, with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "This is about property values. Boats on trailers and yards aren't the image we want for our lakefront community. I'm sure you understand." My face grew hot. I hadn't agreed to any of this. I never signed a thing. And now they were claiming power over my home? Victoria's fake smile returned. "The county commissioner's approval makes it binding. You're free to check the records. Now, if there's nothing else..." The meeting continued, but I wasn't listening anymore. As it ended, Victoria approached me, lowering her voice. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand change is difficult, but Westlake Estates is evolving into a premium community. Some rustic elements don't fit that vision anymore." She paused. "You have 1 week to move the boat, or we'll have it towed, at your expense." Then she patted my arm, like I was a child. "Oh, and Mr. Reynolds," she added with a saccharine tone, "we understand it's a family heirloom, but rules are rules. No special treatment, not even for long-timers." That night, pacing the living room while telling Emma what happened, something clicked in my memory. The wooden box. The one with the words, "Open when needed," carved on it. It had been sitting in my filing cabinet for a year. Maybe this exact moment was what my father meant. After Emma went to bed, I retrieved the box. Cherry wood, dovetail joints, small brass lock. My father's handiwork. He used to say working with wood teaches patience and precision. Two things that made him a great soldier and a great lawyer. I had never opened the box. It had felt too final. But maybe now. It was time. I took the small, brass key from my desk drawer, the one that had rested untouched for over a year. The next morning I called Emma over. She should be part of this. "Is that Grandpa's secret box?" she asked, eyes wide. I nodded. "He said it was for emergencies." Emma smiled quietly. "He showed it to me once, when you were at the store. He said it was insurance for the future. Made me promise not to tell you until you found it yourself." I unlocked it slowly. The click of the brass lock echoed louder than it should have. Inside? No medals, no old pictures, just a thick manila envelope, and on top, a letter, handwritten. My father's sharp military-style handwriting. I unfolded it. It was dated 3 months before his sudden heart attack. "Alec, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've run into trouble with the property. I always suspected it might happen as development spread around the lake. Developers don't care about legacy, just money. What you hold in your hands is your ace in the hole, the original deed from 1952, plus amendments and legal opinions I collected over the years. Our land has riparian rights, special water rights protected in every legal transfer. No HOA, no board, no wealthy neighbor can override that. My hands trembled slightly as I sifted through the documents, and for the first time since I got that smug little letter, I smiled. Because now, the real game was about to begin. Among the documents, there were property surveys dating back to the 1950s, legal correspondence with county officials, and a detailed amendment to the deed highlighting a critical clause. Our property's first 50 feet from the shoreline was specifically exempted from any future homeowners association regulations regarding waterfront usage. One document, dated just 6 months before my father's death, was a formal legal opinion from a prominent water rights attorney confirming the validity of our exemption. I paid good money to ensure these rights would transfer to you, my father's letter continued. When the first developers started buying parcels around the lake 5 years ago, I saw the writing on the wall. I spent nearly $15,000 on legal fees to bulletproof our position. Any HOA formed after the fact cannot supersede these protections without your explicit written consent. They may try, but legally they don't have a leg to stand on. I've highlighted the relevant sections for you and included contact information for colleagues who understand this area of law if you need additional support. Remember what I always told you. Knowledge is the best defense against bullies. The letter concluded with a personal note that brought tears to my eyes. Take care of Emma and the Serenity. The boat may seem like just wood and metal to others, but we know it's much more. It's where you learn perseverance, where Emma learned courage, and where I found peace after Vietnam. Some things are worth fighting for. I'm sorry I won't be there to help you, but I've given you the tools to win. I love you, son. Emma looked up at me after reading over my shoulder, her eyes bright with a mixture of sadness and excitement. So they can't make you move the boat? Grandpa knew this might happen. It's like he's still helping us. I nodded slowly, a smile spreading across my face as I wiped away a tear. Your grandfather was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He knew exactly what he was doing when he bought this place, and he made sure we'd be protected. Pulled out my phone and meticulously photographed every page of the documents, creating a digital backup before carefully returning the originals to the box. What are we going to do now? Emma asked, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in days. First, we get professional confirmation, I replied, scrolling through my contacts until I found Marcus Ortiz, a real estate attorney I'd known since our college days. Marcus had actually been to our house several times for barbecues and had admired the Serenity on more than one occasion. After a brief explanation of our situation, I texted him the photos of the documents. I wasn't expecting an immediate response. Marcus ran a busy practice, but he called back within 20 minutes, his voice animated with professional interest. Alex, your father was brilliant, he said without preamble. I've just done a quick review of what you sent, and these riparian rights are practically ironclad. I'd need to do a more thorough analysis to be certain, but from what I can see, the exemption clause is specifically written to prevent exactly what this HOA is trying to do. They can't force you to move the boat or comply with any of their waterfront regulations without your consent. Relief washed over me, loosening the knot of anxiety that had been tightening in my chest since that first HOA letter arrived. So, we can just tell them to back off? Let's be strategic here, Marcus cautioned. Don't show your hand yet, let them make the first aggressive move. Document everything, emails, letters, conversations. If they try to tow your boat or fine you, that's when we counterattack. They're clearly overreaching. And from what you've told me about this Victoria person, she sounds like the type who'll give us plenty of ammunition. He paused, and I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. Alex, you don't just have the right to win this case. You could make them pay dearly for trying to infringe on your property rights. But let's be smarter than that. I have a plan that might teach them a more permanent lesson. One that would benefit not just you, but everyone dealing with this HOA. As I hung up the phone, Emma was watching me with an expression that reminded me so much of my father. Determined, analytical, ready for a challenge. "We're going to fight, aren't we?" she asked. "We are," I confirmed. "But we're going to be smart about it. Just like Grandpa would have wanted." For the first time since receiving that initial HOA notice, I felt a sense of calm. My father, even in his absence, had provided exactly what we needed. It wasn't just the legal documents that gave me confidence. It was knowing he'd anticipated this battle and believed I could win it. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't property or money, but the foresight to protect what matters most. Marcus's plan was elegantly simple. Don't confront the HOA directly yet, but instead, lay a trap they couldn't resist walking into. We expected them to escalate once the 7-day deadline passed, and they didn't disappoint. On day 8, I deliberately worked from home, setting up my laptop on the deck where I could watch both the road and the lake. Emma was at school, but I had Marcus on standby via phone, and I'd set up my security cameras to record anything that happened. Around 10:30 a.m., a tow truck with Johnson's Towing and Recovery on the side pulled into my driveway. A young man in his early 30s with a neat beard and a company polo shirt got out, clipboard in hand. He looked uncomfortable as he approached, glancing between me and the boat. "Morning," I called out pleasantly. "Can I help you?" He shifted his weight nervously. "Are you Alexander Reynolds?" "I am. I'm Tyler Johnson. I've got an order here from the Westlake Estates HOA to remove a boat from the premises." He held up his clipboard as if it were a shield. I walked over calmly, recording our conversation on my phone in my pocket. "May I see that order, please?" I asked, maintaining a friendly tone. The document was printed on HOA letterhead, authorizing the removal of an unauthorized vessel from my address, signed by Victoria Blackwell. I smiled and handed it back. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This HOA has no jurisdiction over my waterfront property." Tyler looked confused. "Look, man, I'm just doing my job. The HOA hired me to move a boat." "I understand," I said sympathetically. "You're caught in the middle here, but I need to inform you that I have legal documentation proving the HOA has no authority over this portion of my property. If you proceed with removing my boat, both you and your company would be liable for damages. I've already contacted my attorney, who's prepared to file an immediate injunction." I showed him copies of the riparian rights documents, watching as his expression changed from confusion to concern. To his credit, Tyler was smart enough to recognize a legal minefield when he saw one. "I need to call my boss," he said, stepping away to make a phone call. While he was on the phone, I called the local police department's non-emergency line to request an officer to document the situation. When Tyler returned, he looked relieved. "My boss says we can't take the boat without clear legal authority. He doesn't want to get in the middle of a property dispute." Just as Tyler was getting back in his truck, a silver Mercedes SUV came barreling down the street and screeched to a halt behind the tow truck. Victoria Blackwell emerged, sunglasses perched on her head, face flushed with anger. She marched straight up to Tyler's window. "Why isn't the boat on your truck yet?" she demanded loudly enough for me to hear from my yard. I watched as Tyler tried to explain the situation, Victoria's expression darkening with each word. Finally, she turned and stalked toward me, designer heels sinking slightly into my lawn. "Mr. Reynolds, you're interfering with HOA business. This is completely unacceptable." I maintained my calm demeanor. "Miss Blackwell, I've informed your contractor that my property has legally protected riparian rights that exempt it from HOA jurisdiction regarding waterfront usage. Attempting to remove my boat would constitute theft and trespassing," she scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Every property in the lakefront area falls under our jurisdiction. Whatever outdated paperwork you think you have doesn't override county-approved HOA expansion." Just then, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. Officer Bennett, a middle-aged man I recognized from community events, stepped out and approached us. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, looking between Victoria and me. I explained the situation calmly, showing him copies of my deed and the riparian rights documentation. Victoria interrupted repeatedly, her voice growing shriller with each attempt. Finally, Officer Bennett held up a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, from what I can see, there's a legitimate legal dispute here about jurisdiction. Until that's resolved in court, no one should be removing any property. My suggestion is that both parties consult their attorneys before taking any further action." Victoria's perfectly made-up face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. We have clear bylaws that everyone must follow. You can expect to hear from our attorneys, Mr. Reynolds, and the fines will continue to accumulate until that eyesore is properly stored." As she stormed back to her Mercedes, Marcus's voice came through my phone speaker. "Did you get all that recorded?" "Every word," I confirmed quietly. "Perfect. She just made her first big mistake. We now have evidence of an attempted unlawful property seizure. But this is just the opening act. Let's see what they do next." Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated. I received violation notices for my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall, for my house paint being non-compliant with approved color schemes, despite predating any such schemes by decades, and for my boat registration numbers being insufficiently visible from the road. A regulation that didn't even exist in their bylaws. The strategy was clear. If they couldn't force me to move the boat directly, they'd make my life so miserable that I'd give in just for peace. What Victoria didn't count on was my stubborn streak, a trait I'd inherited from my father. Each notice was carefully documented, photographed, and forwarded to Marcus, who was building what he called a beautiful case of harassment and abuse of authority. The social pressure was harder to document, but equally intense. Several neighbors who used to wave or stop to chat now averted their eyes when they drove past. I overheard snippets of conversation at the local grocery store about how that boat guy is fighting the HOA and bringing down all our property values. Emma came home from school one day close to tears because a classmate had said her father was ruining the neighborhood, but not everyone fell in line with Victoria's campaign. My next-door neighbor, Nathan Kim, a software developer who worked from home like me, stopped by one evening with a 6-pack of craft beer. "Thought you might need this," he said with a sympathetic smile. "I've been watching the HOA circus from my window. Victoria tried to fine me last month for having the wrong kind of bird feeder, can you believe that?" Then came the neighborhood-wide HOA meeting, held at the clubhouse on a Thursday evening. I attended, sitting quietly in the back, listening as Victoria gave updates on community projects and finances. When she got to the code enforcement portion, her eyes locked on mine briefly before she addressed the crowd. "As you all know," she began, "maintaining our community aesthetic is vital to protecting our property values. Unfortunately, we have situations where individuals refuse to comply with our standards, potentially impacting everyone's investment. Rest assured, your board is taking all necessary steps to address these violations." Several heads turned in my direction, some with outright hostility, others with thinly veiled curiosity. I kept a neutral expression, making notes on my phone as Victoria continued her thinly veiled attack. Then something unexpected happened. A woman in the front row raised her hand. "Yes, Mrs. Mitchell?" Victoria acknowledged her, clearly expecting a supportive comment. "I'm wondering about the legal basis for some of these enforcement actions," said the woman, Olivia Mitchell, as I would later learn, a retired federal judge who had recently moved to the community. "Specifically regarding properties that may have pre-existing legal arrangements predating our HOA. Has the board consulted with legal counsel about potential jurisdictional limitations?" Victoria's smile froze. "We operate under county-approved bylaws that cover the entire designated area," she said stiffly. "Our legal standing is quite sound." "I see," Olivia replied, her tone measured, but carrying the weight of decades, on the bench. "I'd be interested in reviewing those approvals, particularly as they relate to riparian rights and grandfather clauses. Perhaps at the next meeting." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Then Nathan Kim spoke up from a few rows ahead of me. "I'd be interested in that too. I've had some concerns about the selective enforcement of rules in our community." Victoria quickly moved on to the next agenda item, but the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted. As people filed out after the meeting, Olivia Mitchell approached me, introducing herself with a firm handshake. I wasn't just making conversation in there, she said quietly. I was a federal judge for 15 years. I know overreach when I see it. I think Mr. Blackwell left his widow too much money and too little to do. Do you have a plan? I'd like to help. The following Saturday, my kitchen table was covered with HOA bylaws, county records, and property documents. Olivia Mitchell sat analyzing a stack of violation notices, while Marcus Ortiz pointed out inconsistencies in the HOA's legal claims. Nathan Kim was scrolling through meeting minutes on his laptop, occasionally flagging something for our attention. We had formed an unlikely alliance: a software engineer, a retired judge, a real estate attorney, and a computer programmer, united against what was looking increasingly like a corrupt HOA. She's altered the bylaws, Olivia said suddenly, comparing two versions of the documents. These amendments about waterfront property weren't approved through the proper voting channels. Look at the dates, they were added after the last membership vote. Marcus whistled. That's a serious violation of state HOA regulations. The bylaws explicitly require a 2/3 majority vote for any amendments. Nathan had found something equally troubling. According to these minutes, they're planning to raise the annual dues by 40% to fund a lakeside clubhouse and dock facility. The proposed location? The communal lakefront area, right next to Alex's property. Olivia's eyes narrowed. A dock facility that would extend into your protected riparian area, I'm guessing. I nodded. That would explain why they're so determined to establish control over my waterfront. They need my shoreline rights for their project. There's more, Nathan said, turning his laptop around. The construction company that won the bid for the clubhouse project? Blackwell Construction, owned by James Blackwell, Victoria's brother. Well, Marcus said with a grin. Conflict of interest, violation of voting procedures, harassment, attempted property theft. This is better than I hoped for. We spent hours developing our strategy, rather than immediately confronting Victoria. With what we discovered, we decided to let her continue digging her own grave while we gathered more evidence. Olivia suggested we wait until the investor meeting for the clubhouse project scheduled for the following month. Let her make her big presentation, Olivia advised. Let her commit fully to the project, preferably in front of potential investors and the full HOA membership. Then we present our evidence. The clubhouse proposal requires a 75% vote of approval to proceed, Nathan noted. Once people learn about the brothers' company and the illegal bylaw changes, that support will evaporate. Marcus laughed. Alex, we should thank your boat and Victoria. Without them, we would never have uncovered this scheme. Emma, who had been quietly listening while doing homework at the counter, looked up. Maybe we should name the boat HOA Trap, she suggested with a grin. We all laughed, but her comment sparked an idea. The boat, the very thing Victoria had tried to remove, would become the centerpiece of our counterattack. Sometimes the best defense isn't just a good offense. It's poetic justice. The investor meeting for the Lakeside Clubhouse was held on a perfect summer evening. The clubhouse parking lot was filled beyond capacity, with luxury cars lining the adjacent streets. Victoria had advertised the event as the unveiling of a transformative community enhancement that would elevate Westlake Estates to the premier lakefront community in the county. Inside, architectural renderings were displayed on easels, showing a sleek modern building with expansive decks and a large boat dock extending into the lake. A scale model sat on a central table, surrounded by financial projections promising increased property values and enhanced lifestyle benefits. Victoria stood proudly beside it in a designer dress, greeting wealthy residents and potential investors. Among them was William Montgomery, a silver-haired venture capitalist known for developing luxury properties around the state. He was exactly the type of deep-pocket investor Victoria needed to make her project a reality, and precisely the kind of risk-averse businessman who would run at the first hint of legal trouble. I arrived with Marcus, Olivia, and Nathan, each of us carrying folders with copies of our evidence. We spread out, mingling casually, waiting for Victoria's formal presentation. Emma had wanted to come too, but I decided this might get ugly and sent her to a friend's house for the evening. At 7:30 sharp, Victoria tapped a glass for attention. "Welcome, neighbors and friends," she began with practiced charm. "Tonight marks an exciting new chapter for our community. For too long, our beautiful lake has been an underutilized asset. Our vision is to create a world-class lakeside club that will serve as the social heart of Westlake Estates." She continued for nearly 20 minutes, describing luxurious amenities, exclusive boat slips, and waterfront dining. A PowerPoint presentation showed smiling families enjoying the facilities, with property value projections that had the audience murmuring appreciatively. The total investment required is $3.2 million, with construction by Blackwell Construction, one of the region's premier builders, she said smoothly, giving only the briefest mention of the family connection. "We anticipate completion within 18 months, with immediate property value increases of at least 15% for all community homes." Then she introduced her brother James, who detailed the construction plans with technical expertise that impressed the audience. When they opened the floor for questions, several homeowners asked about usage rights and reservation systems. I waited, patiently, letting the momentum build before making my move. Finally, I raised my hand. Victoria's smile tightened as she reluctantly acknowledged me. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds?" I stood, projecting my voice to reach the entire room. "I have a question about the dock extension shown in your plans. According to these renderings, it extends into the riparian rights area of my property. I'm curious how you plan to address that legal obstacle." A confused murmur spread through the crowd. Victoria's smile never faltered, but her knuckles whitened around her presentation remote. "Mr. Reynolds, all lakefront areas within the community boundaries are subject to HOA governance for the common good. There are no legal obstacles." "That's interesting," I replied, opening my folder and extracting copies of my deed and riparian rights documentation. "Because I have here the original property deed from 1952, with explicit riparian rights that exempt my waterfront from any future HOA jurisdiction. I've also brought copies of the county's recognition of these rights, dated just last week, when my attorney and I filed for clarification." I passed the documents to several nearby attendees who began examining them with interest. "Additionally," I continued, "I've brought a survey map showing that the proposed dock would encroach approximately 30 feet into my protected water rights area." Victoria's brother James stepped forward. "These are just technical details that can be worked out later. Many properties have old easements that can be negotiated or purchased." "That's true," interjected Olivia Mitchell, standing now. "However, as a retired federal judge familiar with property law, I can confirm that Mr. Reynolds' riparian rights are exceptionally well documented and protected. Any construction proceeding without addressing these rights would face immediate injunction." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. William Montgomery, the venture capitalist, frowned deeply as he examined one of the documents that had reached him. "Is there a contingency plan for the project if these water rights can't be acquired?" he asked pointedly. Before Victoria could answer, Nathan Kim stood up. "While we're discussing legal concerns, I think the community should also be aware that the construction contract award to Blackwell Construction appears to violate Section 5.2 of our bylaws, which requires competitive bidding and disclosure of conflicts of interest for any project exceeding $100,000. I found no record of other bids being considered." The room erupted in confused conversations. Victoria banged a gavel, trying to regain control. "These are baseless accusations from a small group of disgruntled residents. The board has followed all proper procedures." "Have you?" asked another homeowner, emboldened by our questions. "Because I've been asking for financial transparency for months." William Montgomery stood, buttoning his suit jacket, a clear signal he was preparing to leave. "Miss Blackwell," he said coolly, "I'm afraid I'll need to see full legal clearance on these issues before considering involvement in this project. The riparian rights concern alone presents significant liability." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "This is sabotage," she snapped, pointing at me. "Mr. Reynolds has been fighting the HOA from day one because he refuses to comply with our standards. He's deliberately blocking progress that would benefit everyone just to keep his eyesore of a boat in his yard." The sudden outburst shocked the room into silence. Even her most loyal board members looked uncomfortable with her loss of control. William Montgomery raised an eyebrow, nodded slightly to several other potential investors, and they discreetly made their way to the exit. As the meeting disintegrated into chaos, with homeowners demanding answers about the bylaws and bidding process, Victoria marched straight to me, fury etched into every line of her face. "This isn't over," she hissed, jabbing a finger toward my chest. I smiled calmly. "You're absolutely right. In fact, Marcus will be delivering a letter to the HOA board tomorrow morning. I think everyone here will be very interested in its contents." The letter Marcus delivered the next day was a masterpiece of legal precision. A formal notice of intent to sue the HOA and its board members personally for harassment, attempted theft of property, illegal bylaw amendments, and breach of fiduciary duty. We attached over 50 pages of evidence, including recordings, photographs, and documented instances of selective enforcement. We demanded the HOA cease all actions against my property, publicly acknowledge my riparian rights, and pay damages for the harassment campaign. Word spread quickly through the community. Within days, a special meeting was called by concerned homeowners, with attendance 3 times higher than any previous gathering. Victoria attempted to control the narrative, but the evidence was overwhelming. When Olivia Mitchell methodically presented the illegal bylaw changes and the conflict of interest with Blackwell Construction, the crowd's mood shifted from curious to outraged. "We've also discovered financial irregularities," Olivia announced, displaying spreadsheets that Nathan had helped compile. "Approximately $42,000 in HOA funds have been spent on consulting fees paid to Blackwell Property Management, another company owned by Victoria's brother, all without board approval or competitive bidding." Gregory Palmer, the vice president who had always supported Victoria, looked stricken. "I was never informed about these payments," he stammered clearly, trying to distance himself from the growing scandal. By the end of that contentious 4-hour meeting, the community had voted to require Victoria and Gregory's resignations, commission an independent audit of HOA finances, and establish a committee to revise the bylaws with proper legal oversight. Victoria stormed out before the vote was even, complete, her designer heels clicking angrily across the parking lot for what would be the last time. The following week, under threat of personal liability, Victoria resigned her position. The HOA's insurance company, eager to avoid a protracted legal battle, negotiated a settlement, $25,000 in damages paid to me, a formal written acknowledgement of my riparian rights, and a legally binding agreement that my property was exempt from certain HOA regulations due to its pre-existing status. Olivia Mitchell was elected as the new HOA president in a special election, running on a platform of transparency and respect for property rights. One of her first official acts was to formally rescind all violation notices against my property and issue a community-wide apology for the overzealous enforcement actions of the previous administration. I used part of the settlement money to repaint the Serenity, hiring Emma and several of her friends to help during their summer break. We chose a classic navy blue with gold trim that gleamed in the sunlight. Once finished, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue on my waterfront lawn, an event that would have given Victoria an aneurysm. Nearly every family attended, many apologizing for their silence during the conflict. "I was afraid of getting violation notices if I spoke up," admitted one neighbor, a sentiment echoed by many others. Victoria had created a culture of fear in the neighborhood. Nathan helped me establish a small sailing club for neighborhood kids, with Emma proudly serving as the first junior instructor. Every Saturday morning, children gathered at my dock to learn basic sailing skills on the very boat Victoria had tried to banish. "Your dad would be so proud," Marcus told me, as we watched the kids rig the sails one bright morning. "You didn't just win a fight, you built something positive from it." He was right. The boat Victoria had called an eyesore had become the centerpiece of a revitalized community spirit. Sometimes standing up for what's right does more than just protect your own interests. It creates ripples that benefit everyone around you. As for Victoria, she sold her lakefront mansion 3 months later and moved away. No one seemed to know where she went, and frankly, no one much cared. The community she had tried to shape through intimidation and control was flourishing without her, becoming the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other instead of policing each other's lives. A year after the HOA battle, I sat on my dock watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and gold. Emma was helping a 10-year-old neighbor learn to tie sailing knots on the Serenity, their laughter carrying across the water. The boat gleamed with fresh varnish and paint, looking better than it had in decades. Olivia had asked me to serve as an informal legal advisor to the HOA board, helping ensure that residents' rights were respected while still maintaining reasonable community standards. The irony wasn't lost on me, from HOA adversary to consultant in less than a year. Under Olivia's leadership, the association had transformed into what it should have been all along, a tool for community enhancement rather than control. The HOA settlement money had been put to good use. Beyond restoring the Serenity, I'd established a small scholarship fund for local kids interested in environmental law or waterway conservation, causes my father had championed throughout his legal career. It felt right to extend his legacy this way, fighting for the proper stewardship of natural resources through education and advocacy rather than conflict. Emma had developed a newfound interest in property law, spending hours asking Marcus questions about riparian rights and easements. She'd even started talking about becoming an attorney like her grandfather. "But I want to help people understand their rights before they get into fights," she explained one evening. "Prevention is better than litigation." My father would have loved hearing his granddaughter speak with such wisdom. Last month, while replacing some worn teak on the boat's trim, I discovered a small waterproof container tucked inside a hidden compartment beneath the captain's seat, another of my father's secret gifts. Inside was a weathered note in his handwriting. "Son, this boat isn't just for sailing on water. It's to teach us that sometimes we must navigate against the current to protect what matters. Always remember, justice is like wind for our sails. It may not always be favorable, but with skill and patience it will carry us home." I read those words often now, finding new meaning in them as our community continues to heal and grow. The divisions Victoria had created are slowly mending, replaced by genuine connections between neighbors who discovered they valued freedom and fairness over rigid conformity. Last week, Olivia came to me with an idea. "What would you think about turning part of the common lakefront area into a small park for the community? We could build a public dock and offer sailing lessons for disadvantaged kids from the city." She smiled, watching Emma teaching her young students on the Serenity. "Do you think your father would have liked that?" I gazed out at the water, where my boat rested peacefully in the afternoon light. "He would have loved it, and I think we should name it Riparian Park, so no one forgets that everyone's rights deserve respect and protection." As I watch the sun setting over the lake now, I'm reminded that some battles are worth fighting, not just for ourselves but for the principles they represent. My father understood that. He left me not just a boat and a deed, but a lesson about standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to give in. That's a legacy worth preserving. One that, like riparian rights, should flow unimpeded to future generations. The Serenity still sits proudly on her trailer when she's not in the water, visible from the road just as before. But now, instead of being seen as an eyesore, she stands as a symbol of something important, that sometimes the things others want to hide away are exactly the things that deserve to be preserved and celebrated, and that, I think, is a lesson worth sharing.